Hi, in this video we'll build a basic synthesizer in the web browser. We'll learn how to use the PolySynth function in P5 and we'll add touchscreen capabilities so that we can play our synth on mobile devices. Let's get started. First, let's work out what we need to do. We need to design a visual interface for our synthesizer in the browser window. Let's draw 5 vertical bars across the screen. Each bar will have a unique color and will play one musical note. We'll add a volume slider to the top of the interface, leaving a top margin to separate the volume control from the bars. How are we going to connect our 5 bars to the musical notes of the synth, assuming that each bar stands for one note? 5 bars suggests a 5-note scale. Let's choose F minor pentatonic, F, A flat, B flat, C, and E flat. Here's our task list. 1. Create a visual interface by drawing 5 vertical bars across the screen. 2. Set up the sound element so that we can play an F minor pentatonic scale. And 3. Add interactivity so that musical notes are heard when we click or touch the bars. We'll start by declaring some variables and arrays. Next, in Setup, we'll create a canvas and give it a grey background. The createCanvas function uses the built-in variables in P5 for the current width and height of the user's browser window. This means that our synthesizer will take up the whole of the browser, whatever its dimensions at the time of running the program. We're also going to write a loop in Setup that calculates the x-coordinate of the left-hand side of each bar and stores that value in the xbar array. The P5 function rect takes an argument for the starting x position of the rectangle, as well as its width and height. We're going to make each bar an object. This will be useful when we need to find out whether a user's finger or mouse is touching or clicking a particular bar. To make each bar an object, we need to write a constructor function. This is a kind of template that lets you make specific instances of a general thing. To keep things organized, we'll write the code for the constructor function in a separate JavaScript file called bar.js. We'll need to remember to add a link to the bar.js file in the index.html file. Otherwise, the browser won't be able to find the code for building the bars. The constructor function includes a parameter called ID. This lets us pass an argument to the constructor to identify each new bar that we want to build. Having this ID parameter will be really useful when we want to ask questions like, what color should the second bar be? To answer a question like that, we'll need to look up the relevant hexadecimal value in the CLR array of color values. The ID parameter will also be useful when we want to know the X position of the left side of a particular bar in the XBar array. Fortunately, there's a straightforward way of setting this ID by using the I variable in the for loop. This variable will be passed to the constructor function and give each bar its own unique ID, i.e. 0, 1, 2, etc. Now we just need to write a loop that actually draws the bars across the screen. We can do this using the word new to activate the constructor function. Using a for loop is an efficient way of doing the same thing 5 times. It lets us create 5 separate bars, each with their own color and X position. Each time we create a new bar, we store it in the array called bars using the push method. Pushing every bar to an array lets us keep track of each one as it's created. Having all the bars stored in one place in an array will make it easier when we need to check whether any of the bars are currently being played by the user. Notice that the integer I has a value between 0 and 4. We use this value for incrementation in the for loop. As mentioned, it also becomes the ID for each new bar when we pass it to the constructor. And remember that computers count from 0, so bar 1 is actually bar 0 and bar 5 is actually bar 4, etc. We now have 5 bars, each of which is a unique object made by the constructor function. Now that the visual interface is done, we need to get the sound working. We'll use the built-in polyphonic synthesizer in P5 called PolySynth. First, some global variables. The notes array stores the frequencies of the notes of the F minor pentatonic scale. You can find pitch frequency values on the web. I'll leave a link below. We need to initialize the synthesis. This is something we'll do in setup, using the built-in P5 PolySynth to initialize our synthesizer instrument. We use the word new to make a new instance of the PolySynth, much like we did with bar. Next, we set an envelope for our synth. You can find the parameters for the setADSR method in the P5 reference. We'll use an attack of 0.1 seconds, a decay of 0.4 seconds, a sustain ratio of 0.3, and a release of 0.05 seconds. Okay, let's design our synth so that it's playable in a browser window on touchscreen or mobile devices. We'll need to connect the visual and sonic aspects of our sketch so that when we touch a bar, we play one of the notes of the pentatonic scale. We do this by writing a P5 function that is called whenever the screen is touched. This function will default to mouse clicks when a touchscreen isn't present. Inside this function, we want to run a loop that looks through all the bars stored in the bars array and asks for every bar whether the user's finger is currently touching that particular bar. We use a for loop to cycle through the 5 bar objects and call a method called played for each bar. This method will go inside the constructor function. It will include a conditional statement that will query whether the finger is over the bar. The conditional here is a simple mouse over query. It takes into account the grey bar that contains the volume slider at the top of the screen by including a 50 pixel offset, mouse-wise greater than 50. The reason for this offset is so that the user can change a volume slider, which we'll add shortly, without actually playing any of the bars. If the conditional is true, then the play method is called on the PolySynth. The play method accepts arguments to determine the note, velocity, seconds from now, and sustain time. We use the ID parameter to access the correct note frequency for the relevant bar being played. One other thing. It's best practice to give the user control over starting any audio inside a web browser. P5 has a function to let you do that called user start audio. We can add this user start audio function to the top of the touch started function in Sketch.js. The touch started function responds to touch interaction on mobiles, but it also works according to mouse click if the program is alternatively run in a browser on a computer screen. One final thing, which is also good practice for web audio, is to give the user the option to adjust the volume using a volume slider. If you want to know more about adding sliders, see my video on sound manipulation in the browser with P5. First, the global variable, then in setup, finally, we need to write some code that constantly checks for any changes to the slider. It should do this for as long as the program is running and update the volume of the synth accordingly. This line goes inside draw. Here we put 25 milliseconds or 0.025 seconds of ramp time between each tick of the slider. This reduces any audio glitches when adjusting the volume while the sound is still playing. And that's it. Now we have a basic synth inside the web browser. If you found this tutorial useful, please hit the subscribe button for more videos on creative digital technology.